Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Rising Sign Horoscope. I am Claire Moon, and we're going to be talking about Virgo and Pisces eclipses today. They're going to be happening September 7th and 21st of 2025. So, September eclipses. I am going to be talking a little bit about this in my upcoming forecast for September, but this was my special transit of the month I wanted to cover in a little bit more detail. So that's what we'll be doing today. I'll also be covering the new moon we just had on August 23rd. That was not an intentional decision to wait until after that. I actually intended to get this out before that August 23rd new moon, but it didn't happen. And then also, I was thinking, well, maybe it'll be interesting to see that, to experience what that Virgo new moon that we just had was. And that might inform us for what especially that September 21st eclipse is going to be. So, I'm just trying to think of any announcements. Nothing new on my end. I am still just being a full-time professional astrologer. You can check out my work at www.aligninglightastrology.com. I have all my booking, events, my writings, if I do any writings. I also have a newsletter sign up if you want to keep up with my work. You can always subscribe to my YouTube channel, of course, but newsletter, I usually send out one a month. It has just a short list of everything I've been up to, kind of a one-stop shop. So you can sign up for that on my website. And then I just want to do a little section here about how to best use this information before I dive into an introduction. This information is your mileage may vary today. Everybody has their own birth chart, and then the transits are happening kind of on top of that. And we also have a few other layers of timing techniques that also influence things. So, a couple special notes today. If you don't know what this is, don't worry, just disregard it. But it can help to understand how important these eclipses are going to be for you if you can look at your annual profections. So, if you annually profect from the ascendant, the luminary of sect, and or the lot of fortune, if you find the sun or the moon to be a time lord, these eclipses might be more important or more impactful this September. If Virgo is a profected place for you, so if, say, you're in an X house year, some year by annual profections, and that house falls in Virgo, then these eclipses might be more important for you. Likewise, if Pisces is an activated place for you this year, then that lunar eclipse in Pisces might be a little louder. So these are some variables that are going to affect how I use the word loud or how vivid the reflection of these eclipses are going to be in each of our lives. And it also can help us to understand why sometimes a transit will happen and it actually doesn't affect us that much. So just a little bit of nuance to add. Uh, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I am going to be doing this by rising sign. So know your rising sign. You can always go to Channy Nicholas's website, astroseek.com. They all have chart generators. You can find your rising sign and then head over to the rising sign horoscopes after the intro. I do not do sun sign astrology. You're welcome to read it that way, but that's not how I'm writing it, just to be clear. And I also like to do so a little bit of maintenance, kind of prep stuff. I have gotten a little away from it, but I want to come back to it more is, before we go off and talk about the future. There's these kind of three time frames we have: the past, the present, and the future. We're going to be fiddling around in the future and, poking around and trying to see stuff, trying to see a fuzzy outline of the future. That really takes us out of the present moment, just like being in the past does the same thing. It pulls us out of the present moment. And we need to plan. So that's kind of why I'm here and why I do this, is that going to the past or the future is not good or bad. But if I am going to go to the future, I don't really want to hang out there longer than I need to in order to just plan and figure out how best to approach my life skillfully, you know? So that's kind of the maybe the heart of what's underneath my motivations is just trying to help us all plan for the future, but not poking around in the future for so long that it starts to be kind of a rumination of some kind. Similar ideas with looking at the past. Stay there long enough to figure it out and then come on back to the present. And I like to give people some tools to try to come back to the present. If you know me, and if you spend more than 2 seconds looking at my bio online, I do mess a little bit with the Buddhism. I'm just but a mere layperson. I'm no one special, but I do like it. And I like to share a little bit about that. And that's a lot of where my tools come from for how to bring myself back to the present because we can think about all these things that might come with an eclipse. You know, we have these phrases like great beginnings and endings, which is kind of dramatic. It can be boring. It can be neutral. It doesn't always have to be dramatic. But with those kinds of phrases, it can rile up a lot of anticipation for the future. And when there's that anticipation for the future, there is tension. And where there's tension, there is probably suffering. So, how to come back to the present. So, I picked one of each from Joan Roshi's, or Roshi, I always say her name wrong, Roshi Joan Halifax's deck. There's water, there's earth, we got Pisces, we got Virgo. So I picked two cards and I usually just pick the shortest, most efficient ones because we'd be here all day otherwise meditating. So I'm gonna just read each of these and you can take them for what you will. Maybe this will be helpful in the month ahead for September. I don't know. But here's a little earth meditation and it begins by saying to be aware of your whole body. Bring your attention to your lungs. On your next in breath, feel your lungs softly fill with air. With gratitude for our forests and our Earth's precious atmosphere, exhale as you remember that your life is hanging on each breath. Recalling this truth, look deeply and ask yourself, what is important for my life now? Earth. It's very practical. Recalling this truth that each of our lives hang on our breath. What is important for my life now? And I say that pretty frequently, or at least I used to. I need to get back to it, of reminding ourselves that we can think a lot about the past and the future, but it's good to also just come back to now and say, well, what's skillful to do right now? Is it taking a breath? Is it sipping on my sparkly water? Is it making some content? Like, what's the most skillful thing to do? And then we can do that. Or to not do, and then not do that. Yay, Earth. So I'm going to leave that there. I'll wait for the water one for when we talk about Pisces, but I'm actually going to talk about Virgo first. So that's good. We'll come back to this later when we get to Pisces and do the water one. So I think with that, let's get into some details, some datey dates. And actually, before I do datey dates, I'm going to do citations, and these are going to be linked below. So as I talk about Virgo and Pisces today, I am also going to be talking about the decans of Virgo and Pisces, the relevant ones. So that's going to be pretty much all of them for Virgo and at least decan 2 for Pisces. And I'm getting this information largely from T. Susan Chang and 36 Secrets, as well as Austin Coppock and his 36 Faces, his decans work. So those are both linked below. Information on those or places where you can learn more. I'll be naming them as I bring up that info. And now the datey dates. So here we are today, right now, as I record August 27th. I'll be probably recording this in chunks. We have The sun at 4 degrees of Virgo. We just had a new moon, and it was right at the very beginning of Virgo. And this very interestingly was square Uranus. So I will get into the symbolism of that in just a moment, but I just want to mention we're starting here at August 23rd. And then the first eclipse we'll be talking about today is on September 7th. This is a full moon eclipse, a lunar eclipse, in the second decan of Pisces, 15 degrees. And then the third thing we'll be talking about is the eclipse. Well, this one's going to be a solar eclipse, a new moon with Ketu at the very end of Virgo. So we started here on August 23rd at the first part of Virgo, and then we're ending at the end of September at the end of Virgo. So that's very interesting. So very, very Virgo time in September. Lots of Virgo activity. So let's go back. So August 23rd, September 7th, and September 21st. And then just to maybe zoom out even further, the lunar nodes got into Pisces. Each of these nodes, which are these points where the path of the sun and the moon cross in the sky, they actually, not only are they coming together in terms of horizontally, but the sun and the moon also are at the same height in the sky instead of being, they're both at the same here, but they're not at the same height. So this is longitude versus latitude. This is declination versus the other one. At these lunar eclipse or these lunar nodes, these are the eclipse points. This is where the sun and the moon's paths actually cross enough to obscure each other's light and to get in each other's way. It's very magical that we get this happening from our point of view, where everything is just at the right distance from everything else that this works, right? So we've got the nodes, and they spend about a year and a half in a sign, in a set of signs. So depending on whether you use the mean or the true node, I'm more of a mean node person. Am I? I forget what I am sometimes. I think I'm mean. And they are kind of what they sound like. The mean node versus the true node calculation. The mean node takes an average of a bunch of positions because the nodes jump around a lot, takes an average. The true calculation is it doesn't smooth out that jumping around of that calculation. I'm going to put a link below that actually explains the difference between mean and true node for anyone who's interested in getting into those very Virgoan weeds, by Stephen Forrest. I love how he explains it, so check that out below. But they both got in here January of 2025. So it was either January 11th or January 29th that the lunar nodes entered into Pisces and Virgo. And they will be in here until August of 2026. By mean, at least. By true, the nodes will be in here until July 26th. So end of July, mid-August of 2026. That's when we get the lunar nodes leaving Pisces and Virgo. But until then, we still have them in Pisces and Virgo. So here they are. And I think that is the last of the datey dates that I wanted to give you. But yeah, if you want more information about those calculations, you can check out that information from Stephen Forrest. And no, actually, there was one other set of dates I wanted to give you. So the last set of eclipses, because this eclipse clock, now, maybe this is also where I bring in my limitations, because one can discuss eclipses in a wider, longer series called a Saros series, I believe. I don't understand any of that. I just want to be upfront. There's information and meaning. Other astrologers who I am not aware of know about this. It's not me. I feel like Bernadette Brady has a book about it that I need to read clearly. But that's not a layer that I'll be bringing in today. But what I do like to bring in terms of like a wider chronology with the eclipses, is that they happen every 6 months. So, especially when it was happening in the same set of signs, we want to look back and think back to what was going on the last time we had some eclipses. And that was back in March of 2025. So we had one of them was in Aries, but we did have a full moon, a lunar eclipse on March 14th in Virgo. And then the one after that, the solar eclipse, that one was on the 29th in Aries. So that is what was going on 6 months ago. We might want to, if you want to look in your diaries, your notes, your calendars, wherever, emails, and try to remember what was going on 6 months ago, especially in the Pisces and Virgo house topics of your chart. So for this Pisces rising, like what was going on in your first and seventh houses. And if you don't know what house topics are, that is all laid out for you in the rising sign horoscope portion. So that's all there. But in any event, you got to find out what houses these are because that's going to tell you the life topics that we're dealing with. And those life topics might have been brushed up for the first time initially last March. So think about last March, ponder, ponder, pause this video, do what you need to do, investigate. Because now 6 months later, we might be revisiting some similar themes. So now that we have the dates, okay, let's actually talk about the visibility for a second because I did collect this information and I did use time and date, and those links are also below. So visibility, before I talk about the symbolism, let's talk about the astronomy stuff, right? So this Pisces lunar eclipse that's going to be on the 7th, that one is not visible for North and South America, with the exception of very eastern South America. They'll be able, like in Brazil, they'll be able to see the eclipse potentially or just a little bit of it. And then pretty much the whole world can see it. And then very western Alaska. So the part of Alaska that's close to Russia, that they might be able to see the Pisces full moon eclipse on the 7th. And then on the 21st, that one will be visible from New Zealand, from a thin strip of Australia's eastern coast, the Pacific Islands, parts of Antarctica, but no one else gets to see it. So very few parts of the globe are going to be able to see the solar eclipse. And a lot of people in different types of astrology, it depends on the astrologer you ask, but if the eclipse is visible where you are, it's said to maybe have more of a potent effect or a more vivid kind of reflection in people's lives versus if you're not able to see it or you're not in that path of totality or the path of the eclipse's baleful rays, as it were. So if you can't see it, I guess that maybe is protective, you know? I don't know, just speculating. So that's the visibility piece. Now the symbolism. I mean, anciently, the thing that I always hear Chris Brennan talk about is the Mesopotamian king ritual where generally heads of nations, royalty, people in power, they are symbolized by the sun being that sovereign royal power. And that light being eclipsed, that light being interrupted, that was seen as like the vitality potentially being interrupted. And there was this fear around a king or a queen or a sovereign dying during an eclipse. So they would replace the king with a fake king, which is kind of funny thinking that we could like fool the universe or fool fate. Um, that's a different conversation for a different day that I'm not going to get into or my own personal beliefs about it. However, this did go on. And part of that was because these eclipses were identified and believed to be not happy events. They were events that spoke to instability, a lack or an interruption in vitality, and it was not seen as a life-supporting, life-affirming event. If anyone's ever been outside during a solar eclipse, like the kind where the sun is blocked out by the moon during the daytime and the light gets kind of weird and the animals get kind of quiet, I don't know. It's a little ominous. It's a little strange. So I can definitely see why ancient people might not have seen it as this benefic event where I should go out and make moon water and stuff like that. There's argument online. We will argue forever until we all die about the best approach to eclipses, the best protocol. I'm not going to get into that today either. That is also a whole big discussion for a different day, but do what you will with this information. I am going to be presenting eclipses symbolically today as not stable, not necessarily favorable events. And my practical approach has that has served me well, and take it or leave it, everyone's got a different context, is during the eclipse window between them, I like to not F around and find out. I like to take it easy, be chill, and not necessarily get into drama that I can avoid. I also like to not begin things. You know, if we're thinking from an electional astrology standpoint, seeding moments into an eclipse kind of pattern, eh, you're kind of putting it on an eclipse clock, so you can expect that every 6 months stuff's going to go on with that story, kind of neutrally for better or for worse. At the same time, it's not the most stable type of weather to plant in. That being said, I mean, people get married, people have children, all kinds of things happen during eclipses and between eclipse windows. So things turn out just fine, but then you have to know that you're kind of setting up whatever is being initiated during an eclipse or around an eclipse. It might be going on that 6 month clock thereafter. So you can expect that. But yeah, the life-giving light of the sun and the very helpful light of the full moon being interrupted, it can be kind of a unsettling, that's the word, kind of an unsettling event. I like to clean, especially during south node eclipses. So like the one we're gonna have on the 21st. But certainly getting ready for September. I'm going to be posting this as soon as possible, so definitely before September 7th. But getting ready for the eclipses, yeah, prep, clean your altars, you know, clean yourself, clean your tub. If you need to do salt baths, doing a salt bath in a clean tub on a Virgo South Node eclipse. Does it get any more fitting? So those are some practical things too that I like to do to get ready. I usually do some offerings that, you know, I figured out from other means that I won't get into today. But if you have any like special rituals or offerings that you like to do during eclipses, getting ready for that beforehand, I mean, Virgo loves to be prepared, right? So, so then symbolically, besides vitality and the eclipses speaking to the interruption of that vitality, besides the notion that eclipses speak to these 6 month cycles, one other way that I like to think about symbolically what eclipses are, again, besides this whole astronomical obfuscation of the sun and the moon, there are also these points where we have similar meanings as the new moon and the full moon, but amplified. So, with new moons, I'm generally speaking about these shorter term beginnings and endings that we see every 28 days when the moon goes around. And we can also think about the idea of a full moon being culminations, fruitings, peakings that again happen about once every month, that have a 2 week lead up and a 2 week dissipation period afterwards. When there's an eclipse involved, this is just all amplified. So we've got great beginnings and endings. We've got really intense or very important peakings or fruitings or culminations with a lunar eclipse. So very similar to full and new moon. I'm just basically dialing up the volume on it. So that's basically what you'll hear in terms of my interpretations. And then we can add on another layer when we think about the South and the North Node. And at least in the Hellenistic tradition, very simply, the South Node can speak to decrease, lessening, the North Node being more a point of increase or more, nom nom, as I always say. If you've heard me speak about the dragon story from Jyotish or Vedic astrology, I did do a little festive thing today. I need to show you. I wore my dragon shirt. I have a dragon on my shirt. I usually wouldn't wear like such a very busy shirt on my YouTube thing, but I was like, you know what? We're gonna wear the dragon shirt for the dragon hole. That's what we're gonna do. So, all to say, we've got these meanings, great beginnings, great endings, big culminations, important culminations or fruitings. And I guess being we're talking about dragons, I will speak about the dragons. So you've probably heard me talk about it before. If you haven't, I should link below. There's probably so many links below now. But I have very recently been talking a lot about the lunar nodes in my Q&A, my astrology Q&A. And so I'm going to be saying a lot of the stuff that the people who follow me have been hearing, but here it is again. So we can think about the North Node and the South Node imparting their influence on whatever the new or the full moon is that's by it. But part of my interpretation of what these nodes do comes directly from this Jyotish story of a dragon called Rahu, the head of the dragon, Rahu, the tail of the dragon, Ketu. And this dragon was trying to get this immortal elixir from the gods, and the gods said, no, you can't have it. And this dragon trespassed that boundary. They got their dragon lips on the immortal elixir. They got some of it. And just as they were becoming immortal, they got their head chopped off by one of these gods. And they became this immortal head of a dragon that is bodiless, it's stomachless. And so, as you can imagine, it's just very om nom nom, just taking in, taking in, taking in, leaning forward. It's very driven energy, but it is also the energy of craving. And so there is that whole chestnut. And on the other end of the dragon, there is the South Node, which is seen as this letting go, this thing that is not hungry, that's not craving. And we can think about the North Node or Rahu being more materially focused, material world stuff, material world achievement. In Buddhism, they talk about the craving for becoming. You know, what am I doing here? What am I achieving? What am I becoming? And that can be a place of craving. The South Node can be said to be more immaterial, more spiritually focused. So there's that difference between them. I like to just think of it very simply as increase and decrease. When I'm getting kind of overwhelmed with all of the information, I can always go back to that increase decrease thing, and that will get you very far. How to add this in with these different eclipses. So, for instance, the September 7th one, we've got the moon and the moon's light being interrupted. Now, this one here, the moon is with Rahu. And so there's a culmination, there's a fruiting, there's a peaking of some kind, and it's about something that's growing, something that is increasing. So there's something important being illuminated or shown around something that's growing or increasing. Or maybe we can even just say that there's a pull here, as with decrease and increase setting up a bit of a directionality. Maybe there's just more of a focus on Pisces, especially since January of 2025. Maybe there's more and more of a focus on Pisces and the house topics that represents for you. And the moon is really illuminating this on the 7th. Versus when we talk about September 21st, now we've got a lunation happening with the South Node, this point of decrease, this point of letting go. So this is going to be a great beginning and ending, or ending, great beginning or ending, and or. And it might have something to do with something that's being let go or released or set down even temporarily. But there's some great beginning or ending where something is being let go, something's being lessened. So very basically, we can put these things together. So that's how I'm building some of my interpretations today, is I'm putting together that new full moon amplified stuff with the decrease and the increase stuff. And then no, one more nuance to add because it's Virgo season is that these increases and decreases, they can be temporary or permanent. It can go either way. And of course, with all interpretations, I'm usually looking for examples both internally and externally. Is this transit? Is this something that's happening inside of me? Or is this something that is happening outside of me and I am witnessing it? So, those are some basics around symbolism with these eclipses and just what eclipses mean in general. So it can be, when you put all this together, this very different duality pair of material, immaterial, increase, decrease, Virgo, Pisces, also different, right? There's almost like this rebalancing that happens when the eclipses spend that year and a half in a place. It's like we're being asked to focus on these areas of life. We're being asked to focus on these house topics that Pisces and Virgo are in for us. And we can, um, it doesn't mean we have to destroy everything and start over. But a lot of times there's something that can use a little bit of rebalancing or shuffling around. Or, or for whatever reason, you know, let's say this theoretical Capricorn rising, maybe they are being pulled into their third house. Maybe there's a lot of focus and energy being asked of them in their third house and with those topics. And then they just have to know that for the next year and a half, that's where a lot of their focus might be going, is wherever Rahu is, wherever the North Node is. And a lot of that focus might have consequences down the road, but it could just be a temporary focus. So, all to say, there can be some rebalancing that happens whenever the eclipses or the nodes move through an axis. And I think there's just one thing left. Yeah, symbolically now, when you read authors like Valens, they say, essentially don't do anything when the moon is with the North Node. Don't do anything, no elections. Please do not start things when an important planet is with the North Node. It was not seen as a positive thing, a favorable thing. It doesn't owe itself to stability. And so much of what we need in order to be prosperous counts on some level of stability. So, one last point with the nodes. We've mentioned increase, decrease, the kind of directionality or the balancing act that goes on in between them, the immaterial, the material duality pair with that. And the last thing I want to mention with the lunar nodes are blurring of boundaries. So that's one other thing to look for, to watch for, not necessarily to judge, but they can show us areas that there might be some blurring of boundaries. So in this theoretical Pisces rising example that I've landed on, the nodes in the first and the seventh, this would be boundaries around self and other, self and relationship. So, how are the boundaries going in your Pisces house topics? How are the boundaries going with Virgo as well? I'm more concerned about Rahu. That's going to be more in the material world, a blurring of boundaries. With the South Node, there can be difficulties with spiritual boundaries. Potentially with if you're in contact with spirits or ancestors, that boundary might be thinner. And, that might actually be something that you can take advantage of if you want to work with people who have departed, work with spirits. That can actually be, the South Node might be a more helpful, fitting type of energy to work with. So, all to say, do what you will with this blurring of boundaries. I think in most practical ways, it's something to manage. Although, maybe with the South Node, there's something to leverage or something that's helpful there with that blurring, depending on what your proclivities are. So, I think that's it for just general lunar node symbolism. I think that's it. Let's get into more of the details around these exact new and full moons, starting with the one on August 23rd. So this is the one that was kind of like the pre-new moon for the solar eclipse that's coming up. It's like a little preview, maybe a little echo, maybe some kind of, here's what this could be about later in September. We've already had it happen. I didn't mean to wait this long, but also maybe it's handy that this has already happened. This is now in the past, and we can look back and think, well, what topics have been coming up in my Virgo house? And it's going to be really important in general. This is a big note. This was exchanging signs. There was an exchanging of signs between Mercury and the Sun. And when Mercury and the Sun are exchanging signs like this, they're not in an aspect. So it's not like the fancy search term would be mutual reception when two planets are in each other's signs and in each other's domiciles. But that means that they're also needing to share an aspect if it's a mutual reception. Here we have what's called just an exchanging of signs. And it's not as much of a mitigating thing. It's not as much of a helping, kind of favorable inducing thing. It's more, I witness it as a conflating of topics. So whatever is going on, whatever great beginnings or endings are happening in our Virgo place, they may also be involved with the Leo place. So for instance, this theoretical Gemini rising, whatever this eclipse series is that's happening in Virgo, in their fourth house of parents, home, family, it very well may also have to do with third house siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles. Or if it has to do with your fourth house home or dwelling, it may also have to do with your third house neighborhood or nearby local spaces. So this is not happening in isolation. This is pretty conflated and linked with Leo. So we're going to need to remember what Leo is about as well. And interestingly, going ahead just to compare it while we're here. Now, similar idea, but on September 21st, that Virgo new moon, now this one is the eclipse. This is the solar eclipse. We have to have the nodes and the luminaries within 13 degrees for it to count as an eclipse. The one on August 23rd was 18 degrees away, 17 and some change. Here now we've got them within, not, what is that, 11 degrees? So it's going to be a partial solar eclipse. And we've got Mercury ruling over it again, but instead Mercury is no longer in Leo. Mercury is in Libra. And the ruler of Libra is Venus, who is here in Virgo. So now we have same thing, an exchanging of signs, not a mutual reception. So there's not much of a mitigation to make this quote unquote function better. But now we need to think about Libra. So now, while the new moon at the end of August really was involving Leo, now, this solar eclipse at the end of September really has to do with Libra. So now we need to look at Libra house topics. So for this theoretical Capricorn rising, this would be their 10th. And their 9th are being brought together with this solar eclipse. So these great beginnings and endings would then have to do with whatever's going on in Libra potentially. So this again is another thing that's not in isolation. And I thought that was kind of a funny pattern. I don't know if there's any meaning behind that pattern. I think it's just a funny dice roll, but that's a thing. So besides that dice roll, then if we do the same treatment and just look at the ruler of the lunation, we got September 7th. We've got the Pisces lunar eclipse, full moon eclipse, and we've got Jupiter in Cancer. Now, this is a mutual reception. So there's an exchanging of signs here as well. But now this one actually is in an aspect, and so we can count it as a mutual reception. And so this eclipse, I mean, this is stabilizing actually. This adds a lot of stability in my mind to what is otherwise not a very stable situation of an eclipse. So whatever is fruiting, peaking, culminating, kind of being illuminated or shown in Pisces with those house topics. So for this theoretical Sag rising, this would be their fourth house of parents, home, family. That lunar eclipse on the 7th is going to have something to do with Cancer. So this is true for all of us, that the Cancer and Pisces topics are going to be brought together for that eclipse. So it's also going to have to do with this person's Cancer house topics. So for Sag rising, that would be their 8th. So there's going to be other areas of the sky that become entangled, intertwined with whatever these eclipses are doing that we need to pay attention to. Um, so again, to just review for that August 23rd new moon, that was in Virgo, that also involved Leo because of an exchanging of signs between Sun and Mercury. The lunar eclipse on September 7th is going to be an exchanging of signs between Jupiter and the moon. And this one's actually a mutual reception because they're in aspect. And then September 21st, we've got another exchanging of signs for the ruling planet of this lunation. So we've got Libra being really important on top of Virgo. So I know that's a lot to consider. This is kind of maybe a prompt for some exploration outside of this video. I know I've located a couple Leo Virgo things for me, but to be honest, I haven't located the other two yet. But yeah, you may have already. So before I move on to the full moon eclipse in Pisces on the 7th, I do want to explicitly state orbs when it comes to how to define an eclipse. How close do the sun and the moon need to be to the lunar nodes in order for it to count as an eclipse? And so we've been hearing a lot of people talk about this end of August new moon in Virgo as pretty much an eclipse, almost like we're getting 3 in a row. And I can actually get on board with that because if we look at this is one of my favorite, this is one of my first astrology books, on the Heavenly Spheres by Elena Avelar and Luis Ribeiro. They define an eclipse on page 169, if you're so lucky to have this book. They say, a solar eclipse always results when the new moon occurs at fewer than 18 degrees from the nodes. The closer the lights are to the nodes, the more complete will be the occultation. And then for lunar eclipses, a lunar eclipse, and this is on page 170, always results when a full moon occurs less than 12 degrees 30 minutes from one of the nodes. So we've got our orb set, 18 degrees for the sun in a new moon, 12 and a half degrees for the moon on a full moon. And I did a search engine search online, and Kelly Surtees also mentioned 18 degrees for a solar eclipse. And what do we have here? We have 17 degrees and some change. So right there. So we can say, yeah. And even if it wasn't, let's just say we want to be, I don't know, more strict than that about what counts as an eclipse. It's happening in the same sign. It's happening in the same set of house topics. And so I don't think it really matters either way. I think this new moon is going to tie into the next new moon that's also in Virgo at the end of September, simply because the same life topics are going to be activated with some slightly different entanglements, as we saw with that difference between the exchanging of signs with Leo in this one versus what'll be Mercury in Libra at the end of September. So, okay, technical corner achieved. Okay, now let's get more into the weeds. Okay, so what about this Virgo new moon that we had the very beginning, the first degree, 0 degrees, 23 arc minutes of Virgo, very square Uranus, and definitely beheld by the benefics. We did not have either malefic planet seeing that new moon. So I don't know how this is going to come out for a lot of people, the exact ways that this will all manifest. But certainly, whatever is seeding or whatever the great beginning here is, it's going to have a tone of something very different, something that could be disruptive. Solutions are sometimes disruptive. So, disruption isn't always bad, but in general, the human mind tends to like consistency. So, yeah, interruptions can be difficult. But if you feel like whatever's opening up at the end of August, whatever's opening up at the beginning of September, if you feel like it's interruptive, yeah. If you feel like it's going to disrupt some things, yes, I agree. And that might not be a bad thing. And if there's something inside of you that's really wanting to be expressed, if we think about Mercury and Leo, usually we're not thinking about Virgo as being super expressive, but I certainly think of Leo as being very expressive and wanting to share that externally. That could be part of what's opening up here as well. Uh, there is a fixed star Regulus that now by precession is technically at the beginning of Virgo instead of being in the Lion constellation. But Regulus is often about visibility, being seen or not. And so that adds to that Leonian kind of sun. Am I being seen? How am I being acknowledged or not? Um, Regulus is also about power and leadership. And the idea is that, and I was just hearing Mel Moline and T. Susan Chang talk about this in the Fortune's Wheelhouse podcast, that, if you are going to have some kind of power or leadership role, and you do get power, the idea is to not use that power for vengeance. And if you are doing a revenge or doing some kind of vengeful act, you will certainly lose your power or some other force will come upon you that is not favorable. So that's at play here for what that's worth. I do recommend, and this is yet another link below, Chloe Margherita, not exactly sure how to say her last name, but very excellent with the fixed stars. So check out their work. They just released another fixed star something or other. That's fantastic. So check that out. That's going to give an added layer of stuff to the end of August. That also, I guess, last thing about it is that it is at this first decan of Virgo where we see Austin Coppock talking about this question of whether or not to intervene or how much to intervene, versus the fixing nature of Virgo versus the Piscean letting go, accepting type of thing. And so there might be some question opening up at the end of August, even before these eclipses happening, that is having us ask these questions around how many details do I need to attend to? Which details do I need to attend to? If I'm going to do some kind of new thing, if I'm going to open up and do a new process or have a new way of living, what parts of that do I actually need to attend to and which ones do I not need to? And this really requires that kind of zooming in, zooming out, being able to figure out which details are going to be needed for the outcome. That when you zoom out and you see the full picture of what is to come, how do I get there? And that's more the Virgo of the steps about how you get to that Piscean vision. But at this point, we're just getting started with that journey. We're just starting to realize the details that need to be attended to. And there is that question of which ones. And before we move into the Pisces full moon, which is going to be on the 7th, and I'll bring it up here. Now, this is clearly, I mean, we got within 3 degrees. But let's go and do our little mindfulness moment because we were with Earth and our practical details and seeing all of the little bits of everything and what we may need to attend to, and then having that discernment to know what to intervene with. You know, that more at the end of August. And then that last meditation really asking us at the end, what is important for my life right now? Very detail oriented in the moment Virgo stuff. So if we take it to more of the water, we can start by affirming our vows. That's what it says. Affirming our vows. Roshi Joan Halifax tells us too. She says, letting your mind and body settle. Recite and reflect on these vows. May I care for all of life. May I practice generosity. May I respect others. May I speak truthfully and constructively. May I cultivate a mind that sees clearly. A girl can dream. And I heard Saturn in there. I feel like this is correct. I do a little bit of cartomancy. It's a little bit of cartomancy with this deck. I kind of try to also, I said this earlier. I try to pick the shorter, more efficient ones. Otherwise, we would be here all day doing these meditation practices. But there's a little bit of cartomancy involved. I feel like I'm gonna pretend at least. And so if we put together these vows that we're affirming with what this Pisces full moon eclipse could be about. Caring for all life, practicing generosity, very Jupiter, respecting others, very Saturn and Pisces, speaking truthfully and constructively and seeing clearly. I mean, at the heart of it, I really don't think that Pisces is delusional. I think Neptune is delusional, and I think Neptune has been in Pisces for 14 years, and it's been hard now to tell what's what. But if I think about, yeah, maybe it's not the journalistic excellence toward detail and veracity of fact that Virgo may have, but Jupiter in Pisces is still devoted to the truth, in my opinion. They are still devoted to what is true. It might be more of a parable, say, of the Good Samaritan, where it doesn't matter who did what, when, or where. The point is that someone did something kind and helped somebody. That was the point of the story. So there's a broader truth. That's more of a Jupiterian Pisces truth. So I do think we can talk about being respectful and constructive and seeing clearly in a Jupiter ruled place. So I do think that we can have Jupiter signifying this clarity and this lunation happening in Jupiter ruled place, especially with the moon that is very bright and full. And in general, I feel like full moons do shine a light on something, they illuminate something. Whatever house topics are in Pisces for you or what's gonna be illuminated, which again are in the rising sign horoscopes later. But something's going to be illuminated. Now, with eclipses, and this is why I do usually exercise a little bit of caution around them, is that with the interruption of that light, also what is illuminated is being obscured for a second or being distorted for a second. And so I don't always personally trust what is being illuminated by an eclipse during the eclipse. I like to let it settle. I like to put it in the fridge, marinate in its flavors for a few days, and then revisit it. But I try not to act impulsively on what comes up around an eclipse as much as possible because the nature of the nodes is to distort things. And the nature of eclipses is to obscure things and get in the way of the light that usually shows us stuff. So that's what I think about that when it comes to the illumination factor. We also have the culmination, the peaking, the fruiting of something that's growing, and now we're seeing what has been growing, especially in the Pisces area of our chart, especially since January of 2025 when the nodes got into here and when this growing in Pisces started to happen. Now, the growing and the increase of Rahu or the North Node is not a stable growth experience. It's very erratic type of growth. It's not the orderly, controlled growth that we have with, say, Jupiter and Cancer. It's not as orderly, a little bit more chaotic with the North Node. That being said, something may have been growing in Pisces, and we're seeing that now. And if you want to especially compare that to 6 months ago, something is culminating, something's coming to its next fruiting, coming to its next point in the story. And that's maybe another way to look at this too with eclipses. Sometimes it's just the next plot point. It's just the next, after 6 months, what is the next signpost on that story? And so again, that's why it's important to think back to March, think back to what was going on there, and now seeing how that's come along 6 months later. And then knowing that 6 months from now, it'll come along to its next point. So Pisces is the wider lens. It's zoomed out. It sees the wider picture of things. It's really good at coming up with a vision and imagining something. And Virgo is really good at all of the details and all of the tiny steps and processes that get us there. And so this eclipse at the beginning of September might be another kind of just check in with, maybe longer projects that have been going on in the Virgo and Pisces area of your life where you're seeing, okay, how are these processes going? Am I sticking to them? And am I making it, once I zoom out for a moment and see how far I've come, maybe again since 6 months ago. So that kind of zooming in, zooming out, seeing the wider picture and all of the smaller steps that you do on the regular that seem very mundane, but that add up and that over time amount to change and amount to growing toward a vision. So that is one way of looking at this. So then looking at the decans, looking at what Austin Coppock says about the second decan of Pisces, and that's going to be this middle 10-degree portion. So we're going to have the moon and the North Node in that middle 10 degrees of Pisces. And Austin Coppock talks about, he calls this the net, how we gather what is useful. Nine of Cups being called the Lord of Happiness, satisfaction. It's where we are able to reconcile the visible with the invisible, the material actions with the spiritual priorities, all of that being aligned. It's like wanting something for your life and then being able to achieve it on the outside. Now, the other possibility here is, especially with Saturn around, if there are difficulties, if there is not that alignment, if, for instance, the priorities that one has on the inside are not reflective of what's going on outside in the material world, that can be unsatisfying or dissatisfying. So, with Saturn here, especially if you're a night chart in your birth chart, this might be showing us, hey, there might be some limitations or challenges on that path, whatever vision that you're trying to make happen on the outside to align with what you want on the inside. If there are any delays with that, yeah, that might be what is being illuminated here. And so, to the best of our ability, if this eclipse is bringing up anything difficult at the beginning of September, my hope is that we'll be able to at least get eyes on the problem, get eyes on what could be more of a longer standing challenge that we need to be patient with or work around. And knowing that at the same time, we've got this beautiful Mercury who's in Virgo that's able to attend to all of the smaller details, all of the kind of 30, 50 step plan that I need to get from here to there. So there are solutions. And if we look at what other parts of the sky are witnessing this eclipse? Jupiter has eyes on it. We talked about that mutual reception by degree and sign. And we've got this not by degree, but Uranus is inputting their kind of disruptive, interruptive nature, doing things differently, putting that into place. And that really sums it up. So, yeah, Mercury able to see things, Jupiter also able to see things. Those are our two planets who are in charge of the sun and the moon. So, it's really important that they're able to tend to this lunation. And we have an agent of change imparting their interruptions or solutions that are disruptive into the mix. Something that, in this case, when we see Uranus that's in a bit of a sign-based T-square situation, it's like some adjustment or change or pivot might be needed in the path. And there's that ability to tap into that change, I think. This might not be comfortable, but with Jupiter in that mutual reception with the moon, it's certainly helpful. It could be less comfortable, I think. So let me see. So what T. Susan Chang says about this decan, the second decan of Pisces, thinking about it in terms of the Nine of Cups, and this comes from 36 Secrets. It is a place where something is culminating in sweetness or happiness, anticipation of good things to come. Something magical is about to happen. The decan signifies matters of importance, magic, sorcery, leisure. This card is about wishes, not expectations. Appreciate the unexpected. There's something here, and I think this was more of my takeaway about working towards something, but not being tied to an outcome or things being aligned such that you can do that. You can just work away and not worry so much about the outcome because you're doing something that you know is aligned with what you're kind of what you want to do with your life, if you have that ability to do that. So there can be a lot of happiness here, a lot of satisfaction. I think there can also be, especially with Saturn here, a chance for dissatisfaction or missing the mark a little bit, something needing improvement potentially. So at this point, if we zoom out, we can see that first kind of eclipse light that we had at the end of August, pointing to the details, pointing to a bunch of things that we're aware of and having to decide what things to intervene with, what things we need to maybe think about having a process with, attending to details. With the full moon in Pisces, we're seeing something illuminated in terms of an ultimate goal or a vision in the other area of life that's maybe competing with some interests with the Virgo part of our chart. And with this illumination of the Pisces house topics, maybe we're also seeing some challenges to that vision, some obstacles, some delays to that vision down the road that we need to deal with. I will say again, I'll say it again. The fact that we have this mutual reception, it's not just the exchanging of signs, but the fact that there's an aspect really stabilizes what is otherwise usually a lack of, or a moment that lacks stability or is, very intense energy, but not necessarily stable. I do think this aspect helps. And last thing I'll say about this eclipse is that we need to also be looking at the Cancer house topics. And so, yes, there's going to be something in Pisces illuminated, something with the life topics in that house. And it may also speak to something going on with the life topics described by Cancer in your birth chart. So make sure to not forget about what's going on in Cancer. That also may be involved. So now we have 5 different houses that we are being asked to consider total today. Virgo, Leo, Pisces, Cancer. So that's 4. And then Virgo, Libra. So 5 total houses worth of topics that end of August through September could be touching on. So I know that's a lot of information, but hopefully we'll be able to sort through it over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And finally, our last eclipse. Now at the last degree of Virgo, we've got a solar eclipse. It's within that 18 degrees. Very, very much closer than the one at the beginning of Virgo. And we're dealing with the Ten of Pentacles, the third decan of Virgo. Again, we're with the South Node, we're with Ketu. So there's a releasing, a letting go, something decreasing, something being set down, whether that is, again, temporary or permanent decrease with the South Node. There is that energy here. New moons also tend to carry that energy of letting go because it's a ending and a beginning. It's the restarting of a cycle. So something is usually with a new moon in general being set down and something else being picked up, or something is being taken into its next iteration. But it is a very reset, refresh, kind of lower energetic time with the new moon. And here, all of this is amplified by it being an eclipse. So if there is something that you are completing, bringing to a close, or something in the process, something you're starting new, how to reckon with the perfect version versus reality, that might be something that goes on here. There might be something to let go. Letting go of perfection is kind of like I think it's kind of right there. You put together Virgo's tropes with Ketu tropes, and that's what you get. But there could be like a letting go of, yeah, the being hard on the self. If your works are seen by others and others can have a critical eye, how to let go of that external praise blame kind of stuff that the sun really speaks to. And now in Virgo, it's like that perfect image that the sun speaks to. In Virgo, it's all the little details about it. And while this does make great craftspeople and great products and, yeah, just all manner of excellent works, we're soft, squishy people and humans that make mistakes. And so those two things are kind of difficult to reckon. And so letting go of those types of various chestnuts within ourselves and, letting go, I think a lot of people mistake it to be one grand moment where you somehow achieve, you know, equanimity and you don't care about something anymore and it doesn't bother you. I more find that maybe this is just because I'm a fixed sign person, but I find letting go, you have to do it over and over and over again. So if there's something where there's a detail that it's difficult to let go of, you might not be just letting go of that once. That might be a many time letting go journey. So all easier said than done type of things, I think, that we're seeing here. Um, See what you can do with it. See how this might play into Libra. So not only are we going to be dealing with the house topics of Virgo in your chart, but then the ruler of this lunation is in Libra. And so we're also going to be dealing with whatever those house topics are. So great beginnings and endings with the Virgo and Libra house topics, I would say, but especially Virgo. And there might be a letting go of something. And the interesting thing is that anytime there is a decrease, anytime we are letting go of something, well, I shouldn't say anytime, not all the time, but sometimes there can be space for something else to come in. There can be unexpected things that come into that space that you would have never expected could be so great. So, not to try to sprinkle too much sugar on it because we are dealing with this opposite Saturn. But when we're dealing with maybe loss or decrease in our life of some kind, one thing to consider is, especially if it was an intentional decrease of some kind, what else can come into that space that is more fitting, that would feel more aligned in that second decan of Pisces type of way. And this one too, this new moon solar eclipse, now I'm happy to see that it's separating from Saturn. They're at 29 degrees, the sun and the moon, and Saturn is at 28 degrees. So that really does give the notion that while the limitations are very present and obvious and fresh, the obstacles perhaps, at the same time, there's a moving away from that. So it speaks to it eventually being in the rearview mirror. But that is still extremely close in terms of an opposition, and it's an opposition with Saturn. So there's a very strong presence both in the full moon in Pisces and the new moon in Virgo at the end of September that really speaks to the Saturnian difficulties of things. Saturn can be long-standing challenges. Saturn can be structure, um, even imposed by the self sometimes if we have agency. But often with oppositions, it can involve other people. Saturn can be decrease, loss, grief, uh, slowness, age. It can be, I mean, sometimes help from older things, but from the point of view of this new moon, whatever Saturn is doing, I don't think it's going to be seen as constructive. I think it's going to be seen as something to manage. And so I don't expect this to be a super buoyant, happy new moon. I am happy to see both benefics present to help lift us up and stabilize and support what is an otherwise unstable time. But I think the Saturn presence is just a bit too strong. Um, so after this solar eclipse, the moon is going to bebop into Libra. And the next aspect that they're going to make to a visible planet is going to be a square with Jupiter once they get out of the bonds of the sun. And that is going to speak to, I'm hoping, something a little bit more buoyant, lighthearted the day after the eclipse. So I know we're going to be touching on the Chiron Mars stuff when the moon gets into Libra. So that will be, not the coolest vibe, but we are also going to be getting this overcoming square from Jupiter, which can lift some things up or give some remedies or some solutions or some help to whatever was maybe feeling heavy with the Saturn opposition the day before. So I'm hopeful that the next day at least might feel a little bit better. But yeah, I think overall we may have to take care of ourselves extra a bit with both September new moon, full moon. Um, taking care of the self, prepping as much as possible so that on those days or around those days, or especially between the 7th and the 21st, doing as much self-care as possible. That's kind of the bottom line. I mean, a lot of the ritual stuff that we do, it's in the name of self-care. So anything you need to do it and prioritize it. So I think with that, I am ready to go into the rising sign horoscopes. Finally, okay, Aries rising, you are going to be having these eclipses happen across your 6th and 12th houses. This 12th house full moon lunar eclipse in Pisces might be highlighting something for you that is about your internal landscape, about your emotional, mental, or spiritual health. This full moon might be illuminating something about ways that you suffer, about a long-standing challenge or a chronic health issue. The moon could be lighting up any of those 12th house topics of particularly mental, emotional, spiritual health, or hidden health matters, long-standing challenges, suffering, grief, all of the Saturn things, because Saturn finds their joy in the 12th, of course. Saturn is here, so that will just add to that flare of Saturn in the 12th. But whatever is being illuminated, it may need some extra care. So then a practical tip for the first week of September then for all the Aries risings is to take care of your mental health, take care of your internal world, take time out for yourself to get away from the busyness so that you can process any things you need to process. If there are challenges about chronic health or other long-standing challenges going on, just know that there could be some information coming in the first week of September. It might need some tending to. Now, The other part of this story is going to happen in your sixth house when we have the new moon happening in Virgo. And this is going to speak to great beginnings or endings having to do with health matters or having to do with animals or pets. Great beginnings or endings having to do with labor or work situations. If you are doing any kind of work to pay the bills, that's kind of the sixth house work I'm talking about. It's the things that you're showing up to for regularly. And this could be a new iteration of how you're showing up to that. It could be a small thing like getting up earlier in the morning or later in the morning. It could be great beginnings or endings having to do with anything that you're caring for on a regular basis, whether that be for yourself or others. So, looking to those more mundane parts of life for the great beginnings and endings happening at the end of September. So, good luck, Aries Rising. These are in some difficult places. So, if you can just get your buns to really July, August of 2026, and then these nodes will be out of these more tender, sensitive areas of the life and can go into some usually more robust areas that, yeah, might not be as intense. So, good luck, hang in there, and let's talk with our dear Taurus risings. So, for Taurus risings, these eclipses are going to be happening for you in your 11th and 5th houses. So, on this full moon eclipse, this lunar eclipse in Pisces, that's going to be illuminating something in your 11th house of friends or groups. There's going to be some kind of peaking, fruiting, or culmination having to do with the groups that you're a part of or having to do with friendships. Or if it's not about groups or friends, this is an area that also has to do with hopes, dreams, and aspirations. So oftentimes the moon will be full in the 11th, and what is being highlighted is something that you've been working on for a while, which is kind of a full moon thing anyway, being it's like this 2 week build up where we work on something and then it's like if I use the metaphor of baking bread. If I'm baking bread by the full moon, I have baked it and I'm starting to share it with people. I'm saying, aha, here is my bread that I have made. And so there is kind of just this monthly lunar working up towards something. But the 11th house is also the place where planets are working up toward the midheaven, working up toward the top of the chart, the top of the sky. They haven't gotten to the highest part of their journey yet. And so there is this aspirational quality to the 11th. And so for Taurus risings, looking at the beginning of September, what is being shown here that you've achieved, especially maybe over the last 6 months since March with friends groups or just any old aspiration you've been working on? What challenges are here still? What other things might need to be tweaked or obstacles worked around to get your friend zone feeling the best that it can feel for you? Saturn might be speaking to some limitations, but there is help in the sky. And so, of course, we're going to want to look into Cancer, into that third house, and see, what's going on also with the local communities, with communication. What are you learning about communication, or what foundational things are you maybe learning that could be helping get over any of those obstacles with friends or groups? What kind of communities themselves might be a solution to any challenges with friends? Well, maybe this community is a good one. And so there could be some really fruitful things being understood or known during September for Taurus risings. There could also be some challenges involved. Uh, and it is really looking at, how well do things feel like they're fitting for you? Now, all of these big visions, all of these big dreams that Pisces has, all the details and processes to get there are more illuminated. That's the thing that we see more with the Virgo eclipse, the solar eclipse on the 21st. I just want it to kind of look like it, close enough. I wanted to get Taurus rising. So, the second part of this equation, the great beginnings and endings are happening for Taurus risings in their fifth house of self expression, creativity. The third house, having been involved in that last eclipse, being about the voice and communication. Now we're seeing something in the second eclipse of the month, looking at self expression and the creative self and how that's shared. Um, in the 11th, it's more shared. In the fifth, it's what's being created. So in the fifth, also, we have topics around children. There could be great beginnings and endings, and it could be around something that they're doing. You know, if you have children, maybe they are picking up a new hobby or letting go of one. Maybe something is, ending or beginning for a child in your life. Uh, and it can also be about romance, great beginnings and endings around romance, sex, love. I like to think of the fifth as the joy of Venus. And with Venus finding their joy in the fifth house, Venus is pleasure, fun, connection, creativity, joy, yum yums, gift giving, gift receiving, all the nice things about connection and all the difficult things about connection, I guess. But in the fifth, it's much more of a positive flair. It's the place of good fortune, uh, Agatha 2K, however they say it. That's what's going on here. So maybe a great beginning and ending with a hobby, with something that brings you joy, great beginnings and endings with gift giving or receiving, great beginnings and endings with anything Venusian at all, but definitely romance, sex, pleasure, fun. That can also be part of what is getting a bit of a reset. We're going to let some things go. There's going to be things being let go. And in that space, what can come in? I think that is one of the questions. And then how is that new thing or ending, great beginner ending, happening? How is that related to your sixth house of your daily life, your daily routines? How are those fifth house things fitting into daily life, fitting into the routines? How are these things fitting into your health? This could be a great beginning or ending around vices. If you need to drop some vices for your health, that could be very apt here. And when it comes to the sixth house being conflict, activism, the joy of Mars, we're laboring, we're efforting, and we might be fighting for something. That might also be the case. So, how is that involved with your creative voice or your creative expression? That could be a part of this great beginner ending is works, creative works having to do with labor, activism, um, doing conflict creatively. Uh, this could be a great beginning or ending in terms of a workplace romance. That's another thing when the sixth and the fifth get conflated. And then also pets, animals, anything having to do with those beings in our life. Great beginnings or endings having to do with pets for some reason. And then finally, sixth house, care, our own health, disease, recovery from disease. What great beginnings or endings having to do with fifth house topics might also relate into our health, wellness, those types of topics. So, best of luck to Taurus. A lot of this again is happening in your fifth and 11th houses, which have to do with self expression, creativity, children, romance, fun, all the things of Venus. And also eclipses shaking up things in the friend zone, highlighting things with your aspirations or what you've been working toward. Best of luck. And let's see what's going on with the Gemini risings. So, Gemini rising, these eclipses are happening for you across your 4th and 10th houses. We see the full moon in Pisces happening in your 10th house of career, illuminating something about the path, what you've done in your life thus far, highlighting maybe some kind of career path, even just from the last 6 months. There's something being illuminated maybe about the legacy and what you're known for or what you're leaving behind. And there might also be a note about challenges there. Saturn could be delays, obstacles, or challenges in that path or with a career path. And we've got balancing with the home, the private life, family life. That's where a lot of this activity is in September. Now, part of the story with what's being illuminated in the career or life path or what's known about you, it might have to do with your second house resourcing, your money, your assets. If you're thinking about your legacy and what you're leaving behind, maybe what this eclipse is highlighting are the resources that you have that are part of that legacy or the skills that you have that people know you for. Thinking more immaterially, the second house is all of the things that you're good at. So then that coming into the picture of what you might be known for. And especially the older you are, that Saturn can really, especially in a day chart, show up as experience, mastery, wisdom, authority on a matter. And so it could be illuminating those more constructive things about Saturn as well up here. It might not just be obstacle, delay, decrease, because something is growing. So, what is being illuminated in the path? What is growing in the path? What's expanding in the path? And how is that being managed? Um, and then, how is the path? How is the career aligning with your values, aligning with what you want for yourself? Is there anything standing between you and feeling like you're living a more aligned life, so to speak, and doing things that reflect your values and what you care about? And if there are obstacles to that, what are the small Virgoan details that you can do to change that kind of incongruence that you might feel? Now, for fast forwarding to the next eclipse, that's going to be happening in your fourth house. These are great beginnings having to do with home dwellings, lands, ancestors, great beginnings and endings to do with family, parents, parent relationships. This could be a letting go of things in your literal basement. This could be definitely the clearing out of the clutter in the basement, in the home, a clearing out of the dwellings, any kind of letting go of things from the past. And that could be physical things, that could be emotional things, spiritual things, all kinds of things we can let go from the past. Um, this could be, maybe when we think about ancestors and this kind of blurring of the boundary between the spirit world and our world with Ketu or the South Node, this could be, maybe a great beginning and ending in being in communication with ancestors or dearly departed loved ones. Great beginning or ending with the land, with how you interact with the land, how you have a relationship with it, how you steward it, even down to, do you have a garden? And maybe this is a great beginning or ending in how you're managing that garden. So, all manner of fourth house, home, family, private life. I didn't say that one. Great beginnings and endings with your private life. That might also be relevant. Now, worth noting that end of September, there's also going to be a conflation with the fifth house. So, great beginnings and endings having to do with home, family, private life, land, ancestors, but maybe also fifth house children, uh, creativity, self expression. So, how you express yourself with your family, the creative things you do in your own home. This could be a great beginning or ending having to do with your private life and romance or sex. This could be any kind of, creative thing that you're doing privately. Maybe there's a new hobby that you're kind of keeping to yourself, and there's a great beginning or ending there. And then finally, when it comes to the fifth house of children, and thinking about the fourth house being family and everyone who's living in your house, there could be a new thing there, a great beginning or ending there. Maybe you are, I can think of people who have an expanding family and then they have to move to a bigger house or something, and they're kind of letting go of certain things, but it's in order to make more space for, say more children or some kind of system in the home. Say you have some kind of pantry organization method that now is needing to be changed because you have a toddler that gets into everything. So it can be, pretty neutral, boring stuff having to do with childcare and home life and great beginnings or endings and that whole drama that we all have. Uh, so let's see. I think that about sums it up, but there's a great lot of energy happening in your fourth and 10th houses. So for Gemini risings, a lot of this eclipse energy is going to be around private life, public life, your home and family situation, your career and public life situation, um, as well as your past and where you're headed, or your past and how far you've come in your legacy. So, all of those big fourth and 10th house topics coming to the fore. And best of luck, Gemini. Let's speak with the Cancer babies. So, this is happening for you, these eclipses in your third and ninth houses that have to do primarily with education, communication, travel, beliefs and worldviews, politics, also regular communication and mass communication. So, all of these more intellectual spheres, also very mundane, local in the third house versus ninth house, far away places. Our first eclipse light, which would have been happening at the end of August. And then we have that lunar full moon eclipse. That's going to be in your ninth house of advanced or continuing education. So, something being highlighted or illuminated about your continuing or advanced education, something being highlighted about something culminating about those topics, perhaps, especially maybe since 6 months ago. So, if you're on some kind of educational path, this set of eclipses might just be the next check in after 6 months of doing this educational path. And we're seeing a culmination of fruiting in the more advanced portion of that educational path. Also, a fruiting or a culmination around long distance travel, maybe around publication or mass communicating something. If you're someone with a blog, anyone who shares anything widely, whether it's words or dance or art. To me, that's ninth house. So, this could be a really important culmination or fruiting of something you've been working on sharing with people. Or maybe it is the sharing of it. Uh, this could be a fruiting or an illuminating of what's been growing in terms of your beliefs or worldviews. You might have a lot of clarity or understanding around what you're believing and how you might want to embody that. And this is ninth house institutions, bureaucracy, politics. So a culminating or fruiting of something in regards to those topics. The ninth house has a lot to do with, God, if we think about like 2000 years ago, government, church, state, university, all the same building. Uh, if we think about like visas and bureaucracy and passports and forms and having to do like, any legal things. In the ninth, we are doing all of these forms and talking to experts and navigating institutions. So, at least like in America, if I'm thinking about this Americanly, there's a lot of people who are being messed with and harmed via these institutions. So, if you're someone who this is a relevant topic in terms of having to apply for certain programs or government assistance or deal with institutions or bureaucracy or politics, this could be some kind of fruiting about that or showing you how far you've come in that process in the last 6 months. Just kind of seeing what is here. And we also might be seeing the limitations, the challenges, the obstructions to, say, travel. You also might be seeing the challenges, limitations, obstructions to what you're trying to mass communicate, to any forms you're trying to process in some bureaucratic institution. There might be some challenges afoot. So then we're going to defer to Mercury a bit, knowing that we've got a really strong player down here that can help us with all of the details when we're looking at this bigger, wider kind of aspiration. Virgo can help us with the 30-point plan to get there. And then we also need to consider in this early September eclipse the first house of self and circumstance, general circumstances, mind, body, spirit. I know a lot of times Jupiter can just simply stabilize things, which can look like nothing is happening. But sometimes Jupiter is just the absence of a harm. And so I'm hoping that Jupiter will be protective. And this is also maybe speaking to the importance of the self in whatever is being shared widely, the importance of the self in the travel or the path or the beliefs or the worldviews that are being held. Um, when I'm thinking about the first house being health and the body, this could be some kind of culmination of all the things you've learned about your own self, all the things you've learned about your body or your health, and seeing from like that very wide and advanced perspective of, yes, that is me. Haha. So there's something about the self coming in here with this that could be really constructive or helpful in some kind of way. And then with whatever's illuminated, then we're going to have this cycle close out into a great beginning or ending of some kind. And that is going to be in the third house of communication. So great beginnings or endings having to do with communication, regular communication. Maybe you're just putting in some new inbox filters into your email inbox. This is great beginnings or endings with third house people, cousins, siblings, extended relatives, step family, chosen siblings, chosen family. All of that, those people, it's like everyone who's not your parents, pretty much. Those are third house people. Maybe there's great beginnings or endings with those folks. This could be in community. Great beginnings or endings with especially local or familiar communities. Sometimes those communities are local geographically. Other times those communities are digital but familiar. So great beginnings and endings there. When it comes to the third house in terms of foundational learning, this could be a great beginning or ending in terms of learning something new. And then when it comes to embodying your beliefs, if the ninth houses are big beliefs, the third is the little details, in this case, about how you embody that. What do you do to live out those beliefs? Even when or what ritual things kind of express themselves in your regular life. One of my favorite examples of this, because I think it's easy to think of like, okay, if you are a certain religious person, you're going to go to temple or church or whatever you have on your certain day of the week. For me, it's my meditation group on Tuesdays. But when I used to be atheist, it was my pour over coffee routine because that was like, it happened regularly and it filled my soul full of purpose for the day. So that was my little secular ritual. But the third house is about all that. And so maybe there's some great beginnings or endings having to do with those third house rituals or embodiment of belief. The third and the ninth are about divination, all of the sciences. And so the eclipses in September for Cancer risings could be some kind of progress in terms of divination or those set of skills. So that could be going on. That's for a very specific subset of people, but honestly, like kind of my key demographic. Everyone who listens to me pretty much are also into astrology. So if you're a Cancer rising, you're into astrology, this could be like culminations of how far you've come learning astrology with that the full moon eclipse in the ninth, and great beginnings or endings when it has to do with your foundational learning of divination or practicing of divination. Now, with this September 21st eclipse, there is a conflation with the fourth house. So now we are getting maybe parents, the rest of the family involved, ancestors, grandparents, they might be part of what is beginning or ending locally or with third house people or places. Living arrangements, things with neighbors. Um, this could be the classic neighbor has a problem with the trees on the fence, which affects your living situation somehow in your backyard. Anything with the fourth house in terms of past, whether it's your own past, your origin story, past conditioning, and that overlapping with third house topics. So this could be, just making up stuff, rituals that help you heal from your past, new beginning there. It could be great beginnings or endings around communication based on something that has to do with family. It could be communication with the family, communication with the ancestors, rituals for the ancestors. So all of the rituals with the land. Great beginnings or endings. Sure, let's throw gardens into this one too. Great beginnings or endings with your garden. So it's not just going to be the third house, but maybe also the fourth house being involved a bit. Best of luck, Cancer risings. And let's see how the Leo risings shall fare. Okay, Leo rising, you're going to have this first of two eclipses in your eighth house of other people's resources, especially your one-on-one partner, like a spouse or a business partner. Their resources. Perhaps something is being illuminated that has to do with that. The eighth house is also about debt, taxes, and complex finances. It is also a place that is about estate management and planning, end of life topics, and death. And there's a lot that goes into those topics, but there might be something illuminated about those things at the beginning of September, and maybe even some challenges around those topics that you're working through, and maybe seeing, okay, here's the vision of how I would like this area of my life to look, whether it's how I am doing my complex finances, how I'm gathering provisions for death, how I'm sharing my talents with others. Maybe I have a vision for how that's going to look. If you're a business owner, you're going to have your list of offerings and what services that you offer and for how much. And maybe Saturn is speaking to some challenges with those things, but I do think there's a lot of help in the sky. We have Jupiter and Cancer in the 12th. And so there might be, especially behind the scenes work, something hidden that other people aren't really going to know is helping, but could help somehow. If, say, you're dealing with end of life topics, what might be helpful are private spiritual practices, or your relationship with what is ineffable, or your relationship with your own psyche or your internal landscape. Whatever's going on in there might be of some help or assistance to whatever's going on with your eighth house topics of shared resources or complex finances or death. Now, another part of this equation, of course, is the second house of your resources, your money, your needs as well. And we have someone, Mercury here, who's very seeing the details of what you need, seeing the details of your money, your things, your stuff. And I think that's going to really help in understanding what is being illuminated about the other. Or, whatever you know about your own resourcing, that's going to help you in dealing with whatever is going on in the eighth. Now, this loop is going to come around. It's going to lead to the second house of your resources, your needs, and a great beginning or ending around those topics. So whatever was illuminated about other people's resources, that might inform the great beginnings or endings having to do with your resources. Or whatever was being illuminated about end of life topics, that might really be showing you at the end of September what you need. The eighth house being other people's needs, the second house being your needs. So great beginnings or endings, maybe even around communicating your needs, around sharing of your needs with others. I know in a lot of cultures and societies, I'm kind of talking about my own here in the Midwest United States, they don't really teach people how to understand what their needs are, how to communicate them with others, which is a very difficult process sometimes, especially the less you know yourself, the less you know what you need. And then walking through that vulnerability of sharing that need with someone else and hoping that they can help you meet it. All of that might be wrapped up in the second and third house conflation. This could also be great beginnings or endings around how you talk about money, how you talk about your talents, how you share about your skills and what you have to offer. Really like bringing into the voice all of the things that you have to offer. Um, the third house, cousins, siblings, aunts, uncles, relatives, in laws, there might be a great beginning or ending having to do with sharing of resources with those folks. Something about your resources having to do with third house people or communities. Perhaps you're going to be, there's a great beginning or ending in terms of investing into a local community. Any of those are possibilities here. But knowing that that is somehow tied in with what is being shared, what is being collaborated on. And I think a big note for both Aquarius and Leo risings with these eclipses is that whatever is happening with the sharing, how can we make it sustainable? How can we make it feel fair and reciprocitous? It's not that both sides have to give the same or the same amount of the same stuff, but they both have to give such that each side feels that there is a fair kind of energetic exchange. So there's flexibility. There's going to be flexibility built into this because we're dealing with mutable signs. But certainly the idea, I think, is to how do we get the sharing and the resource management made in such a way that it feels like it aligns with the values and is reciprocitous and fair if it's involving other people. So best of luck to Leo risings with that. So for Virgo rising, you're going to be having these eclipses happen across your first houses of self and seventh house of the other. Seventh house of really important one-on-one relationships, partners, spouses, business partners, best friends. The seventh house is also clients, patients, if you're someone who has those kind of one-on-one professional interactions, that is also a seventh house space. And also buying and selling for those of you who professionally are into anything that has to do with buying or selling. The seventh house has to do with that other party that you're selling something to. So the other, we'll just call it the other, right? And the first house is you. It's your mind, body, spirit, and general circumstances. So this first of the September eclipses, this is going to be highlighting the partnerships. Something is fruiting, culminating, or peaking about partners. Maybe this eclipse has nothing to do with you, and it is something that your partner is having come to fruition. Maybe it's something they've been working on for the last 6 months. In terms of your own partnerships, consider what was going on about 6 months ago. Where are you now in that partnership journey 6 months later? Uh, the seventh house, seeing something illuminated about partnerships, something that, maybe even has some difficulties included, some limitations, challenges around, something difficult about partnership as well that might need to be worked through, especially in order to get to some kind of alignment with what is desired. Whatever kind of vision that you have for partnership, if there's a sense of lacking or a sense of it needs improvement, yeah, and then how can we work toward that? And thankfully, we've got Mercury who's doing a really excellent job of attending to those details, those processes. If something in this partnership needs to change, what can I do regularly to make that wider, longer vision happen down the road? And I think that's a lot of what these eclipses are dealing with, especially the August, end of September ones, dealing with those fine details and processes that are involved in this wider Piscean vision. Now, the September 21st eclipse, This one is going to be a great beginning or ending with the self. A great beginning or ending having to do with the physical body, appearance. It could just be that you get bangs, you could get a new wardrobe. There is a letting go, so certainly a cutting off of hair or a letting go of old clothing would be very apt. Especially being we're getting some conflation with the second house of resources. So, especially if you were getting rid of old things or um, even just like kind of letting go of the idea of using certain resources that maybe used to help you but don't help you anymore. All of that could be part of the great beginnings or endings having to do with self in September for you. And this could have to do, I mean, if there is anything being let go around health, that could be letting go of certain health routines, letting go of certain ways of thinking about or approaching health topics. But there is a letting go of something there as well. And maybe changing or new great beginnings or endings in how you invest into yourself, how you invest into your health or your mind, spirit, how you invest in all those things could be part of the great beginnings or endings. How you conceptualize of yourself. You know, we have many identities. Those identities fluctuate and change over life and how much we understand ourselves. And so it's very common to let go of certain ideas about the self and see what else can come into that space. And Venus is here, Libra is involved. And so there can be that sense of mental balance, equanimity, hopefully, instead of what Venus can do in Virgo, which is maybe attending to details in a way that is hard on the self. So if you're feeling a little hard on yourself at all this September, hang in there. There is a lot of Saturn energy, and Saturn can be that really hypercritical voice. That should pass. You are having your very last bit of Saturn sending that oppositional ray right to your first house, which can be tough. And again, it can manifest in being hard on the self. Venus and Virgo also can be hard on the self. So we've got two things here that might have that self criticism amplified over the course of September. And, you know, with Saturn here until February, yeah, maybe that advice to be extra kind to the self, extra as accepting as possible. I know that's an easier said than done, and it's a lifelong sport. But Saturn isn't doing us any favors. Saturn isn't usually the accepting soft one of all the planets. So if you can just put a post-it note on your whatever to remind yourself that you're great and to be kind to yourself between now and February, I think that's going to be a good course of action. But great beginnings or endings around the self. And it has something to do with what we maybe learned about partners or partnership. And it probably also has to do with your needs. So, how are the needs being met? And are they affirming of the identities? All of these questions that are, again, like easy enough to intellectualize and talk about, but very difficult in practice to, again, identify the needs or, you know, figure out what needs to be let go of, what to come in, and then how to share that with other people and interface with others. That's all a lot of hard work. So, best of luck with it. Check in with it in 6 months. And with that, we'll talk to Libra risings. So, we've got a Pisces full moon lunar eclipse happening in your sixth house of health, pets, and labor. And so something being illuminated about any of those topics at the beginning of September. The moon is going to be shining light on matters of health, and especially considering, you know, maybe where you were in March, thinking about how far you've potentially come in terms of a health matter. With Saturn around, there may have been some chronic health challenges that are still wrapping up, still coming to a close, but we're seeing maybe another plot point in September on that health journey. And just doing your best, you know, with as much agency as you have to advocate for your health during September. Take her easy. If you feel like you're getting overexerted, listen to your body. This is just a lot of energy in these places. And so navigating that energy can be interesting. Otherwise, with pets, again, thinking about 6 months ago, if there's any stories with them that have been going on, this could be yet another plot point. I don't expect any health problems to arise necessarily with these eclipses, but certainly if you're waiting for information or wondering about a certain health thing, eclipses and full moons can illuminate those topics. Now, we might just be illuminating what is difficult and what is hard, but knowing that we also have a lot of strength in Mercury to help us sort out some details about how to get from point A to point B with any challenges with health or pets. The sixth house of labor, our day to day kind of paying the bills, doing chores, taking care of ourselves and others, that kind of day to day labor might be illuminated. And perhaps what's being illuminated is, coming to a certain type of routine. Like, oh, I've been trying to put this routine together and here it is, and I'm seeing it. Or I've been trying to imagine some kind of labor situation, and now I'm maybe understanding what it is that I would like that to look like. Um, but something about labor being illuminated here. And then finally, conflict is another sixth house topic, how we navigate conflict. This is a place where Mars finds their joy. So we get topics of war, pestilence, plague, conscription, and really seeing things in that, also activism and service. If we have agency about the exploitative labor that goes on in the sixth, we can call it service work. There could be something being illuminated or highlighted around any of these topics of conflict, of activism, or war, and seeing what is going on there, especially compared to 6 months ago, maybe how those things have progressed along. And again, might be seeing some challenges with those topics as well. Now, the next eclipse on the 21st, that's going to be happening in your 12th house of internal landscapes. People call it the subconscious. It's what's hidden. I call it the internal landscape. It's what's going on in there, your emotional, mental, and spiritual health. There could be great beginnings or endings around your spiritual health practices. It's what you do in private, it's the core foundational private place from the ninth. So of all of our big beliefs, what is at the core of it? What's at the root of it? Where did it come from? What are you doing in private about it? And there could be some great beginning or ending in that realm of private spiritual practice. We also have the 12th in terms of suffering, and so great beginnings and endings in terms of suffering, how we navigate suffering. Of course, I am wishing the best for everyone. I don't assume health challenges right out of the gate, but when we are dealing with the 12th house, we're dealing with chronic health challenges sometimes, or just very long-standing challenges, whether they're legal challenges or challenges with our own internal worlds, mental health challenges, but long-standing ones. And this might be a reset button on that. This might be a great beginning or ending in terms of those chronic health or longer standing challenge stories. For anyone who has identities of being marginalized, anyone who is disenfranchised, this could be great beginnings or endings having to do with those experiences and how one navigates those experiences. The 12th house is a place of bad spirit. A lot of times this can come in terms of hidden enemies. Now, I think the mind immediately goes to external others who are a threat, and that can absolutely be true. Anyone who has had a stalker knows all about 12th house enemies. But 12th house enemies can be tricky, and they can also be when the call is coming from the inside of the house, and it's our false stories that we have about ourselves. It can be the self-loathing that culture or family origin has kind of conditioned into us. And so the 12th house of, these sufferings of the mind, false stories about the self, and what an opportunity to let go of false stories around the self. during this eclipse because it's also involving your first house of Libra. So what false stories about yourself, what self-loathing could be let go of? And again, these like letting go of things. Everyone's like, "Oh, let go, let go, let go." It's not usually just a one-time deal. Usually letting go requires, and maybe I'm just projecting my own fixed house or fixed sign heavy chart onto others, but it takes me a long time to let go. And I have a feeling that I'm not alone in that, and that letting go requires many, many letting goes over a long period of time. So, what false stories about the self can we recommit to letting go of? Uh, what spiritual, mental health, emotional health practices can we recommit to? Maybe older practices that no longer work can be let go of, and we can bring in new spiritual, mental health, emotional health practices. When it comes to behind the scenes work, behind the scenes stuff, just kind of being in solitude, great beginnings and endings around that. And then finally, with 12th house being loneliness and exile, alone time, depending on if you want it or not, it can be solitude versus isolation. And what great beginnings or endings are happening around that? Even just down to what are you doing with your alone time? And are there great beginnings or endings happening there? So that's what I've got for you, Libra Rising. Best of luck with this one. Again, I don't know if you heard me say it before, but the sun and the moon are moving away from Saturn during this solar eclipse, which I like to see. That matters. We want we want things moving away from Saturn. So, whatever challenges have been, I'm hoping that this eclipse series speaks to solutions that can come to help move away from whatever those Saturnian challenges are. Best of luck, Libra Rising. Let us speak with the dear Scorpio babies. I'm sure they love being called that. We have Pisces and Virgo in your 5th and 11th houses, and especially this first eclipse the first September eclipse, this full moon lunar eclipse on the 7th of September will be illuminating your 5th house of fun, rest, pleasure, sex, romance, creativity, self-expression, as well as the 5th house of children and gifts and gift giving. All of the things of Venus in the 5th house. That's what is being highlighted, for better or for worse. So, especially if we're thinking back to March of 2025, if there was any themes around romance, self-expression, creativity, children that are now reaching maybe another plot point 6 months later, or again, something peaking, fruiting, culminating, coming to being with the 5th house. If you're an artist, perhaps you're having an art project or something coming into being or coming into its completed form. Maybe there's something about your self-expression in general you've been working on for a while, and that's coming into a fruition of some kind. You're seeing the results. When it comes to the 5th house of children, your child could be the one who maybe is seeing something come to its conclusion or come to its final results. So if your child has been working on something for 6 months, maybe they're seeing that peak and come to its conclusion. Um, Whatever's going on with the 5th house, though, there could be a chance of Saturn showing some limitations, some challenges, some difficulties. So even though we've got this vision of what fits and what's aligned, there might still be some work that is needed to get there. And so if there is some of that disappointment with Saturn being around, just knowing that the rest of the sky can provide some support. Perhaps others, friends, groups can provide some kind of support around details about how to get over these obstacles or get around these challenges. Or maybe we can also look to the 9th house. What advanced knowledge, what kind of experts could help if there's any 5th house challenges around creativity, children, love, romance? What belief systems might be helpful? Um, or, in terms of what's peaking or fruiting, It could also just have something to do with the ninth. So maybe, what has been being worked toward, or what is coming to its fulfillment, also has to do with the ninth house. Might not just be creativity. It might be not only self-expression, but publishing it. It could have to do with traveling with your children. It could have to do with beliefs and sharing that with your children. It could have to do with any kind of sharing widely of what you're expressing. Or, maybe you're learning a lot about love and romance, and that's bringing you to a place because of all of your advanced knowledge about that. So there's some conflation of the ninth here. There's some bringing in of some of those topics. And that's going to bring us around to September 21st, which will have some great beginnings or endings happening with friends or groups, or great beginnings and endings around aspirations. The 11th house is what we are working toward. It's working up toward that 10th house of greatest actions in life. And so the 11th being our aspirations. Maybe you're letting go of old aspirations and new ones are coming in. Maybe there aren't new aspirations in and you're just letting go of some old ones that aren't really fitting anymore. And that can be really kind of unsettling. It can be, especially if you're someone who's really driven and always working towards something, to let go of that thing that you've been working toward can be really difficult for some folks. But, for what it's worth, there's going to be then space for something else to come in. And even if that's not right away, whenever something else is ready to come in, then there will be space for it to come in. Now, this also analogy could be drawn with friends or groups. Maybe there's some friends or group situations that are being reduced or diminished or being let go of. And that doesn't always mean that there's other people to fill those spots, right away. But if there is some space or some voids in the friend zone, um, know that then in that space, there is space for more to come in eventually. So there might be some letting go. Now, I'm always looking for examples of things happening inside of us or externally or both. And so here, while we might be seeing some external decreasing with friends, it might not be. It might be more of an internal thing that's being let go of, an approach to friendship maybe being let go of, or a way or a type of way of doing friendship being let go of that isn't really being seen on the outside as directly or right away, but might be an important beginning or ending with how friends are managed. Now, the 11th can also be groups or organizations that you're a part of. So if you are like the treasurer of something, this could be a letting go of that position or a letting go of doing that position in a certain way, and then having a great beginning or ending around, yeah, anything having to do with an organization. So that's your other option for the 11th. It could have something to do with the 12th house of hidden things, behind the scenes work. So in terms of what you're working on, great beginnings or endings around aspirations, it might not be apparent to others. It might be something that you're doing that's a little bit more private or that you're keeping closer to your heart until it reaches maybe more developed stages. If you're working in an organization, this could have to be behind the scenes work at that organization. This 11th house having to do also, if we're conflating it with the 12th, this could be great beginnings and endings around how your kind of spiritual internal life interfaces with friends. Maybe friends uh, are something that requires you to take care of your mental health a little bit more, or manage, making sure that you're hanging out with, not to sound like everyone's parents, but hanging out with the right crowd so that it doesn't stress you out too much. That would be a classic conflation of friends and the place of strife. We don't want the friends creating more strife, ideally. So what great beginnings and endings might be happening that have to do with reducing the strife that groups and friends might bring, especially depending on what your birth chart looks like. Best of luck, Scorpio risings, with all of that. And let us turn our attention to the next sign, our Sagittarius risings that are going to be experiencing these eclipses across their fourth house of home, family, private life, parents, ancestors, the land, as well as the 10th house of life paths, careers, public life. So, the first eclipse in September, on September 1st, this one is going to be really highlighting, illuminating matters of your past or origin story. Or another option is that this moon is going to be highlighting topics around parents or parent relationships. The full moon could illuminate things around ancestry, grandparents, all down the line, intergenerational themes being illuminated or highlighted. The fourth house is our home, where we live, our dwellings. And so this could be some kind of fruiting or culmination of something that has to do with your living space. If you, especially since 6 months ago, have been working with any of these topics, this could be some kind of coming to fruition, the final result of that 6 months, or some kind of milestone in that those topics if you've been working on those or dealing with those over the last 6 months. So the fourth house having to do with private life, you know, kind of a neutral way. If you've been working on managing your private life in a different way, this could be some kind of fruition of that hard work that you've been doing. Now, Saturn is here, so there is this note that there might be something that is a challenge around parents, living situations, ancestry, some kind of challenge or delay or obstruction around these themes that still needs to be worked out. There could be some level of dissatisfaction here, or just seeing what more work is ahead of you. Now, the good news is that Mercury is very capable of parsing out all the details and helping get to that more Piscean vision of things if there is something left to be desired. But it really is about that coming together of the wider vision for what you want in your home, in your parent relationships, and then all of the little details and processes that need to be done regularly in order to get there. The kind of path that one in this case might need to have in order to kind of get to the family life that they want. So the next, or maybe before I talk about the next eclipse, let's also consider the eighth house, which actually could be a point of resource or stability. There's something about the parents' home, ancestry, land that could very well have to do with eighth house collaboration and sharing. There could be something even helpful from especially partners or partners' resources that might be helping to stabilize what is growing in the home. Um, with parent relationships, when we get eighth house involved, I know a lot of people's minds go to end of life topics. With any kind of family member, you know, the eighth house gets activated. We're thinking about end of life topics, death. Um, I don't necessarily see this as a big focus in Sagittarius rising, just because we're dealing with such a favorable and well dignified, favorable, benefic Jupiter in your eighth house. This feels like, you know, it could be getting ready for end of life in terms of estate management and planning, having those conversations, which might be a huge bummer, but you know, especially when things are going well, especially if things are stable, that's the perfect time to be talking about how to handle people's transition at the end of their life that all of us are going to go through. So there could be some kind of involvement of the eighth house collaboration for this eclipse on the 7th, some theme coming in about complex finances, or this eclipse on September 7th, there could also be something coming in about end of life topics. If there's a lot of understanding or just realizing of things, that is a real possibility. Maybe there's nothing to do but to just sit with that new information that comes in September. And then that will bring us to a different eclipse on the 21st. And this is going to be in your 10th house of career, life paths, your legacy. And these are great beginnings or endings around those topics. So We're always looking for examples of how these things turn out in our lives, and it can happen inside of us. So this could be letting go of certain ways of approaching career so that you can approach career in a new way, and all of that happening internally as an internal process. This could also be a very external, very real letting go of a career path in order to begin something new. This could be letting go of a certain idea about what you wanted to leave behind and moving towards something else as a legacy. So there's a letting go of something, a letting go of maybe a public role, letting go of how you interface with the public, or a letting go of how if you are a public person, how you navigate that. There could just be a letting go of how you navigate being public if you are public. So there's definitely letting go of something up here, but the idea I think is that even if we're not sure what's going to come in instead of that, there will be the space for something else to come in when it's ready. And it's worth noting that whatever is being let go of or whatever processes are being renewed, it might have to do with the 11th house of friends or groups. So great beginnings or endings in the path, in the career, and maybe that also changes the groups that you're interacting with, for better or for worse. If there is a change in your public life, maybe that has something to do with friends or groups as well. I think about the 11th as well as aspirations and hopes and what we're working toward. And so, great beginnings or endings in the path or career that are also related to aspirations, what you're working toward. Maybe you're letting go of one type of aspiration in order to pursue a different type of aspiration. So there could be some shifting around that for Sagittarius risings. Um, Overall, there is some help, and a lot of that help I think is going to come from the eighth house. So for Sag risings especially, don't be afraid to ask others for help, ask others for assistance, even if it's just listening for a little bit over the course of September. That might be very supportive. But overall, these eclipses are happening across your fourth and your 10th houses. So this is really a matter of those big topics of family and private life and public life and where you're headed. So best of luck, Sagittarius rising. And let's get into Saturn land and speak with our Earth children, the Capricorns. So we're going to be having this activity now for September happening across your third and ninth houses of education, communication, and travel, as well as beliefs and worldviews, and the embodiment and practice of those beliefs and worldviews. The third and the ninth is also about divination and rituals that go along with that divination. And finally, the third house people. All of the third house people, pretty much everyone except for your parents, cousins, aunts, uncles, in-laws, neighbors, community members, chosen family, third house people. They might also be a focus in September for you. And finally, communities, whether they are local communities, your local area in the third, or familiar people, familiar communities that could in this day and age be digital. All of that third and ninth house stuff is activated for you in September, and that begins with the eclipse on the 7th, where we're going to see this happening, some fruiting, culminating, peaking in your third house. And so the moon is going to be shining some light upon third house communications, short distance travel, light illuminating third house people. Maybe something about those third house people is being illuminated. It could be if you've been especially working in the last 6 months on any of these things around communication, learning, communities. This could be some kind of fruiting or peaking. We're seeing all of that work that you've done over the last 6 months, and now you're seeing the fruit of that in the terms of how things are being communicated, what's been learned, how you're interfacing with your local spaces, your third spaces. It's not home, it's not work, it's a third space. That's the third house. And so any kind of community work, especially if you want to think back to last March, how far that's come in the last 6 months. If you're learning any languages, how far that's come in the last 6 months. So all of that being said, Saturn might be showing some challenges, some difficulties, or things in which there still needs to be some work done. But there's a lot of resourcing here from other people. And other people might have to do a lot with this story. So whatever is fruiting or culminating in the third, it might have to do with others. It might have to do with especially important partners or best friends or business partners. If you're learning something new, maybe it has to do with a certain client or patient population that you help take care of or support. So there's something in this eclipse on the 7th that is not only having to do with language learning, communication, travel, but also other people. So it could be, you doing a lot of these things, but I don't know if it's by yourself. And then that culmination, fruiting, is going to lead to our September 21st eclipse. Great beginnings or endings. Now with advanced learning, continuing education, so college and university, but really anything that's past high school, any certificate, anything that you're learning advancedly. Maybe you're just informally being a big nerd on your own. All of that could be these great beginnings or endings around advanced learning and knowledge. The ninth house also has to do with travel to faraway places, whether that is as a student, as a tourist, or as a pilgrim, as what is his name? Oh my gosh. I thought his name was Rick Steves. As Rick Steves says, you can travel as a student, as a tourist, or as a pilgrim. So what great beginnings or endings are you having around long distance travel? In terms of mass communication or publishing, any great beginnings or endings around mass communication or publishing? With the ninth house having to do with institutions and bureaucracy. So if you're having to navigate some kind of government thing in order to get aid, or you're having to navigate visa documents or passports or things of that nature, this could also be great beginnings or endings having to do with those topics. If sometimes those topics go on for many years and people have many iterations, many application processes in the course of years, this could be a great kind of reset or kind of the next phase or the next era of that journey. And, especially comparing to 6 months ago, seeing what has come from the last 6 months and kind of how to regroup and begin again. That's the idea here with a new moon. That's just very amplified. So great beginnings and endings around advanced learning, long distance travel, institutions and bureaucracy, publishing or mass communication, and great beginnings or endings around beliefs or worldviews. So maybe there's something you've been learning, taking in different information or new information over the last 6 months, especially. And now it's led to some kind of great beginning or ending in terms of what you believe. And so that might be going on. Something's being let go of though. So there's a lessening, a decreasing, a loss of some kind here. I mean, this wouldn't be the time that I would put in an application. I would, if you can avoid it, I wouldn't be submitting any kind of paperwork to anyone around September 20th or 21st because I don't want the moon going into this like kind of dragon hole of decrease. That being said, something about this ninth house, great beginnings and endings, is going to have to do with the path, the wider life trajectory, the career potentially. So if you're starting off a new thing or completing something in terms of education that has to do with a career goal, or traveling to a faraway place that has to do with a life path, or traveling that has to do with career, all of that could be going on. great beginnings and endings around what's being published or mass communicated and its effect on your public life. So the 10th house is going to be a factor here. It's probably going to be some of those topics coming in as well, having to do with public life, career, life paths, and legacy. So, best of luck, Capricorn. Aquarius rising. You're having this across your second and eighth. So we're back to this conversation about your things and resources, your needs, your money, and other people's things, other people's resources, other people's needs, other people's money. There's a lot of collaboration that happens in the eighth because we can have interfacing of our resources with other people's resources. The eighth has to do, as the second is the provisions for life, the eighth house are the provisions for death. And so we have the eighth house having to do with topics of end of life, estate management and planning, inheritance, but also all of the philosophical and other things that go into topics around death or making that transition. So there's that whole chestnut that might be activated in September for you. The eighth is a place of collaboration and sharing. That might get activated. The eighth is also a place of taxes and debts. And so the eclipses in September might be shining light or amplifying topics around taxes or debt. Now, the first of these two September eclipses is going to be happening in your second house, illuminating matters of your resourcing, your needs, and how those needs are being met. Especially if you want to think about back 6 months ago, if these topics were activated, how far you've come in navigating money stuff, money questions, money challenges. Thinking about in the last 6 months, how far you've come in maybe getting your needs met. So, thinking about that in these 6 month periods of time where maybe we're reaching milestones or new parts of the story. The words reciprocity, fairness, sustainability, all of those come to mind. You don't have to give the exact same, but there should be some idea of fairness or equal energy exchange, ideally, when we're dealing with eighth house collaboration. So, with the moon in your second, really showing you, illuminating what do you need and how are you going to get those needs met? What about your money? And what's fruiting or culminating? If you've been working towards something financially, this could be a time of really seeing how far you've come in working on whatever that financial goal is. Now, Saturn is here, so I do think there's going to be a note of dissatisfaction, maybe challenge, obstacle, delay, something kind of getting in the way of what could otherwise feel more aligned or congruent. And so, if there are those challenges around, being honest about them, having the light shine on them, and then trusting that Mercury is going to help us sort out the details about how to get from point A to point B and get to that big vision that Pisces can have for these areas of your life. So, as that conversation is happening with the second and the eighth for the September 7th eclipse, we also have to consider this information about the sixth house that's coming into play. Now, the sixth house has to do with labor, health, animals, and that's it's really strongly related to this story. So, what about the day to day tasks? What about the day to day routines are there? What things are going on in that mundane life that might support getting your needs met or support reaching your financial goals? What things in the labor sphere can help support the second house goals? When it comes to pets, what kind of investment is happening to take care of pets or even to take care of other loved ones? So there's something going on here that isn't just about your money, but then how that's interfacing with your daily life, who you're taking care of, your chores, your duties and responsibilities. And, this could also be saying, yes, there is resourcing and help on the day to day. It might take a little bit of effort to have that translate to second house success. But I do think that there's the potential here. We've got a mutual reception. Venus and Moon are exchanging signs. And so there's more of an ability to make the second and the sixth house here work better with each other. So whatever challenges are on the path with resourcing, there does look to be a lot of support coming in some more mundane ways or with labor situations. Finally, maybe there's enough stability because sometimes what Jupiter is doing is they're just bringing stability. And maybe that stability and that lack of malady is helping to really reach these what is fruiting in the space of resourcing. Maybe stability around health, stability around labor is helping to get the needs met, is helping to meet the financial goals in some way. So certainly not the least stable eclipse I've ever seen. Jupiter is very much helping. Now, the second eclipse of the month, we're going to see this on the 21st. This is going to be in your 8th house of other people's resources, shared resources, and it's going to be great beginnings or endings having to do with that. Great beginnings and endings having to do with how you share yourself with the world. This could be a letting go and a reorganizing of your offerings or lists of services. This could be a letting go of debts or taxes or how to approach taxes or debts. This could be a letting go of how to navigate complex finances. Maybe you had one strategy and you're going to do a different strategy when it comes to a retirement plan. So there's kind of a letting go of one way of doing things here so that a new way can come in. The 8th house has to do with death and end of life topics. So there could be a letting go of, again, certain strategies of navigating that or certain ideas about that. Maybe certain things that were desired around estate management and planning, maybe now different things have come in. One example that is probably very relevant for me, I've been thinking about doing it for a really long time, is updating my own advanced directives because, of course, I am a morbid 12th and 8th house person and I have my advanced directives already complete. I actually did them for the first time in my mid-20s and they're actually obsolete now. I'm a whole different person than I was in my mid-20s and I really need to rewrite them and hand it into my local institutions so that they can actually enact them if something happens to me. And this includes a digital legacy. That's a new thing that we have to deal with in this new age, is not only in our estate management and planning, all of that normal stuff with, money and laws and, all of the details there, but also digital stuff and social media accounts and all of, who's going to get into my computer and save all of my essays if I die. So, there could be some constructive or more neutral or not dramatic things happening related to the 8th house. That being said, if let's, get a little bit more serious and consider if there is a loss, maybe someone has already had a loss, recent loss. The 8th house, I put grief in here. I put grief in the 12th. I put grief in the 8th. And this can be a letting go of certain ways of navigating or managing our grief and new ways of dealing with that coming in. So great beginnings and endings having to do with the navigation of grief. The 9th house is involved somehow, and so beliefs and worldviews coming into play, whether that's with how we operate our finances, how we share with others, how we share our talent and our time with others, any of that being influenced by beliefs or worldviews. That could be the case here. In terms of sharing or collaboration and travel, not sure how that's going to show up for people, but it could. If you're one of those RV couples, that would be very relevant. And the 8th house in terms of sharing, collaboration, and then thinking about the 9th in terms of advanced learning or advanced education, we could have study buddies. We could have a great beginning or ending in terms of kind of dividing and conquering the educational sphere. This reminds me of, group work, group projects in school, but, Sometimes there'd just be so much reading to do, and me and my classmates in pharmacy school, we would divide up the reading. We would all write little study guides to really summarize that reading, and then we would share and create a group mass study guide so that we all didn't have to read all of the material, but then we would teach each other and kind of had this whole exchange so that we could get through the material before an exam, which was pretty much impossible, especially if you had a job outside of school. So if you're learning something, if you're working through maybe a ninth house bureaucratic or political issue, and we want to bring the eighth in, this could be a great beginning and ending in how you navigate those ninth house challenges using group help, using collaborative support from others. So the ninth and the eighth can come together, I think, in that neat way. So best of luck, Aquarius Risings. I hope this goes well for you. And again, those magic words of reciprocity, fairness, and sustainability when it's coming to how one is interfacing with others and exchanging themselves with the world. I think that's the name of the game. Best wishes. We're going to talk to our beloved, ever patient Pisces Rising. Thank God for timestamps. We've got them. So we're going to go back to September 7th. We're going to see this happening in your first house of self, Pisces Rising. So we've got a lunar eclipse. They are happening across your first and seventh, the lunar and solar eclipses in September. So these eclipses are going to be amplifying themes of self and other, self and relationship, identities and relationship, identities and others. The first eclipse here on the 7th of September, the first one in September. This one's going to highlight the self, highlight the appearance, the body, the spirit, the mind, as well as illuminating the general circumstances. So this could be, especially if you've been working on something. Maybe you've been working on something with your health, especially for like 6 months. Now in September, we're going to see the fruiting or peaking of that. What's come of all of that over the last 6 months? Maybe you've been working on just expressing yourself and taking up space and, living out your identities. And now you're seeing the fruit of that. Maybe you've been working on, changing up your wardrobe, and you're seeing that after collecting a bunch of awesome thrift store finds, you've got a new look that has come to fruition. So there's any kind of first house thing that could be growing or coming to its form that you've been working on. So that's going to be illuminated. I'm always looking for examples of things happening inside and outside. And so this could be what is being realized or seen or illuminated is something that you're just noticing in yourself. Maybe this is not as apparent externally, but it's some kind of understanding about the self or seeing clearly about the self that's being noticed here. There's also Saturn. So there's this last little bit of Saturn in your first house that you have to get through. That's going to be done September 13th of 2026. Saturn does bring some notes of delay or challenge or difficulty. They could bring notes of criticism or feeling hard on the self, being hard on the self. So if you have been having some challenges around the self, the identities, whether it's just self-acceptance or, something that's more tangible, I want us to actually look to where Jupiter is for support a little bit. Because the moon is going to be showing us these things, showing us what's still challenging, illuminating what is still a problem. But there could be some support from the fifth. Jupiter is bringing the topics of the fifth and the first together here. So now not only is something fruiting about the self, something's coming to the fore around identities. It is intimately related with the self-expression or creativity, or if you've been resting and taking care of yourself and filling your cup and having fun, that might be part of what is fruiting with the self or what's this final result that we're seeing, or this next kind of milestone on a path, it has to do with the fifth house of creativity and self-expression. This could also have to do with children. If children are relevant, there's something that's being shown or illuminated about the self that is tied to children for some reason. The fifth house children a lot of times are part of people's identity, being a parent or being, I have nibblings, I'm an aunt. And so there's part of my identity as an aunt that is being defined by children. So maybe what this is for Pisces risings is just an illumination of your roles in the lives of children, or the illumination of your roles as an artist. And then finally, the fifth house is also romance and sex and all of that kind of joy of Venus stuff. And so what is fruiting or coming to some result that maybe you've been working at for the last 6 months around dating, romance, or your sex life? Or sexuality, seeing something or realizing something around one's identities that have to do with sexuality. All of that could be going on. So, and these might be areas of support, these fifth house areas of fun, romance, children, hobbies, self-expression. All of those things might be supportive during this eclipse. Now we've got the next one on the 21st of September, and that's going to be happening in your seventh house of partners. I have this, I wanted to show both the moon and the sun over here, so it's not quite the right time, but imagine this is September 21st, and these planets are coming exact at 29 degrees in your seventh house. Whereas the last eclipse at the beginning of September was more focused on you and your identities and your health, this eclipse, these are great beginnings or endings around partners, great beginnings or endings around partnerships. On the 21st of September, the solar eclipse could be more internally experienced. Maybe your approach to partnership is changing. Maybe you're letting go of certain ways of approaching really important one-on-one people like best friends, business partners, marriage partners, letting go of certain ways of approaching, if you're a professional and you've got one-on-one clients, one-on-one patients, this could be great beginnings and endings around those professional relationships and how you approach those. And it can be external as well, if someone is beginning a client practice of some kind, that would be a very great beginning in terms of the seventh, is growing a client practice. But something is being let go of here. So there does seem to be like some kind of open space being made in the place of others. And we don't always have something to go in there, but eventually if there is space, nature abhors a vacuum, so something will come in. But that can be part of the great beginnings or endings here, is that with that letting go, it might be a moment of not a lot in there in that seventh, but then someone else comes in. It could be if you're changing jobs, if you're moving, if other things are going on that are changing who you're interacting with. That would be one kind of just natural way that great beginnings and endings happen in the seventh. And then, of course, with marriage partners, great beginnings and endings there, whether it's in how you navigate that relationship, or in the case of the partner kind of manifesting this transit or reflecting this transit, maybe it's the partner that's having the great beginning or ending, and it's not you, it's actually them. So I'm not sure, but we'll have to see. And it could have to do with the eighth house. So the September 21st eclipse, it's also going to bring in themes of your eighth house, of your partner's resources, sharing of resources, and complex finances. And so any great beginnings or endings with relationship, it could also have to do with like how you're sharing, maybe how you're operating bank accounts, how you're divvying up your time, your energy. This could be a great beginning or ending having to do with your partner and their needs and how their needs are being met. This could also be the classic partner gets a raise, they got a new position, and with that, they have new resourcing. Partner gets a new job, and we get different health insurance. Best friend gets a different situation, and now they're not quite as available as they used to be. So, any of those things with the eighth, it's not just money, it's time, it's energy, it's talent, it's everything that we can collaborate. So, there might be these questions at the end of September having to do with shared resources. Um, the eighth house is also, if it's that collaboration and sharing, and if clients or patients is a relevant topic for you, great beginnings and endings in the services or what you're offering or how you are helping others. And then finally, if we think about the eighth house being end of life topics, the provisions for death, inheritance, estate management and planning, all of these kinds of things, and of course, all the emotional, psycho, spiritual stuff around end of life transition, all of that's in here too. So this could be, I'm certainly not predicting the worst here, but some more neutral or kind of mundane ways that this could present would be great beginnings and endings around partners and how you're doing your estate management and planning. Maybe you realize, hey, we don't have a medical power of attorney, or we don't have, a legal or whatever. This is where I start to not know what I'm talking about. Like the things that you need to do to make sure that probate doesn't need to be done after the death, kind of realizing those things that need to be done beforehand. It could be about that. That could be a thing. So, um, you know, feel it out. Context is everything. Context is key. I do not predict death with astrology, but the eighth house topics are potential, they are potentials that might be added in with the seventh house topics. Okay. And if anyone has any questions or concerns, especially on those eighth house things that I've brought up, you can always email me at aligningliteastro@gmail.com or put a comment below. But I think that's pretty much what I have. I think that's it. So best of luck to Pisces rising. Best of luck with you and your beloved others.